They were the best the military had to offer. Hardened, sharp-eyed, and battle-tested. SEAL snipers, men who had seen the worst of war and survived it. Yet here, on this mission, every single one of them had failed. The enemy held the mountain pass with an iron grip. It wasn't just a position, it was a fortress. Natural terrain hid their movement, and every approach had been studied, defended, and laced with traps. Drones couldn't see much. Ground units barely made it halfway. The snipers were called in to shift the balance. But after days of effort, they'd hit nothing. Not one confirmed target. Only silence in return. And then, suddenly, counter-sniper fire that forced even the most skilled shooters to retreat. It was humiliating. It was dangerous. And it was getting worse. By the 5th day, the tone in the command tent had changed. Confidence was replaced with quiet tension. The mission clock was ticking. Troops couldn't advance. Supplies were being rerouted. Every hour lost meant risk to the lives of hundreds waiting just a few clicks down the road. Then someone mentioned a name. Not with excitement, but with hesitation. Captain Elena Morris. She wasn't a legend. She didn't give speeches. She didn't even look the part of what many expected from a Special Forces sniper. But those who knew her, really knew her, said one thing. She never missed. She arrived without fanfare. No entourage. Just a bag over her shoulder, a rifle in her hand, and a calm look in her eyes. Her presence didn't light up the room, but it silenced it. The other snipers watched her, not with jealousy, but with curiosity. Why her? Why now? She said very little. She asked only for the terrain maps, satellite footage, and transcripts of the failed attempts. For 6 hours straight, she studied, circling positions, cross-referencing weather reports, even listening to intercepted enemy radio chatter. And then, finally, she stood. "I'll need to be dropped off 3 kilometers from the ridge," she said simply. "Alone." The room went quiet again. Alone? No backup? No spotter? "You'll never make it back," one of the officers warned. She didn't answer. She just looked at him and said, "I won't need to." By nightfall, she was gone. Disappeared into the thick brush of the highlands, moving with the patience of someone who didn't see this as suicide, but strategy. Those who had underestimated her now watched the monitors in silence. Nothing appeared. No contact. No visual. Not a sound. But she was out there. The enemy had outmaneuvered the SEALs, outsmarted their equipment, vanished into the cliffs like shadows. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that someone else was coming. Someone who didn't fight like them, who didn't need to rely on tech or teams or loud tactics. Captain Elena Morris was out there now, and the silence wouldn't last for long. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the mountain was already alive with whispers, shifting winds, the faint rustle of wildlife, and somewhere, far beyond what the ear could hear, the movements of the enemy. Captain Elena Morris moved through the terrain like she'd walked it in a past life. Every step was calculated. Every breath was controlled. Her rifle was slung low, wrapped in cloth to prevent any glint. There were no unnecessary movements. No second chances. 3 kilometers from the ridge, she stopped. It was a natural hollow, protected on 3 sides by jagged rock. From here, she had a partial view of the valley below and the rise of the pass ahead. It wasn't perfect, but perfection wasn't her goal. She needed observation. She needed time. Back at base, the silence was starting to feel heavy. No radio check-ins. No heat signatures. Nothing but empty screens and growing uncertainty. She should have made contact by now, one officer muttered. But the head of the unit shook his head slowly. "She's not like the others," he said. "She won't call in unless she has something to say." In the hollow, Elena pulled out a small notebook. Not digital, paper. Quiet, simple, reliable. She began marking patterns, noting the times she saw movement on the far ridge. A flash of metal. A shadow that didn't match the trees. A bird that didn't fly the way birds should. She wasn't looking for the enemy. She was watching for mistakes. The hours passed. Wind picked up. Fog settled low. Visibility dropped. And that's when she saw it. A shift. Subtle. Human. Her hand moved to her rifle with the same calm a pianist has before striking the first key. Slow. Deliberate. Familiar. Through the scope, the world narrowed. Trees blurred. Distance vanished. All that existed now was a man, partially hidden behind a slope, scanning with binoculars. She watched him longer than most would. She wasn't here to shoot at shadows. She was here to confirm, commit, and remove. Another figure emerged. Then another. They weren't patrolling. They were planning. And they were far closer than anyone back at base believed. She adjusted her elevation, factored the wind. Breathing slowed. One shot. The man with the binoculars dropped without a sound. The others hesitated, confused. No muzzle flash. No echo. No idea where the shot had come from. Another adjustment. Another breath. Second shot. Another man fell. The third tried to run, but too late. 3 shots. 3 confirmed kills. No alarms. No alerts. Just silence again. But this silence was different. Now, the enemy knew something had changed. Elena didn't move. Didn't celebrate. She waited. Minutes passed. Then more figures appeared, carefully, cautiously, scanning the terrain. She predicted this. The counter-scout team. Armed. Smarter. Quieter. But not quiet enough. She stayed still, letting them think the shooter had moved. One of them stepped into the open, crouching behind what he believed was cover. Elena fired again. Panic set in. The rest of the group scattered, shouting in a language she understood well enough to know they were afraid. Back at base, the radio crackled for the first time all day. 4 confirmed. No counterfire. Continuing observation. The room went still. The same officer who had doubted her earlier stared at the radio like it had spoken prophecy. She wasn't just surviving out there. She was winning. And she had only just begun. The fog thickened by morning, curling around the rocks like smoke from a fire long burned out. Captain Elena Morris remained still, her rifle laid flat across her lap, eyes scanning through the scope with slow precision. She hadn't slept. She hadn't needed to. Every hour she remained undetected was a message to the enemy. Someone was watching. And this time, they weren't the ones in control. Below her, the enemy compound was coming into focus. A cluster of camouflage tents and dug-in positions lined the ridge. They'd built it smart, hidden beneath the canopy, blending into the terrain. It looked like no more than a patch of trees to the untrained eye. But Elena saw what others had missed. Movement wasn't random here. It was tactical. There were patterns, routines. But something else too. Something colder. She watched a group of men gather near a makeshift lookout post. Not soldiers. Not exactly. Their weapons were mismatched. Their uniforms unmarked. Mercenaries, maybe. Or worse, militants funded by off-the-books channels. No insignia. No rules. One of them pointed toward the valley and spoke with urgency. Another man, taller, heavier, with a hardened face, gave a quiet nod. He didn't speak much, but everyone around him obeyed without question. Elena marked him in her book. This was their commander. Back at base, the command team was staring at the latest drone feed. Still nothing. Clouds had rolled in again, cutting off thermal imaging. They were flying blind. But not Elena. She had the only eyes that mattered now. She whispered into the radio, her voice barely above her breath. Target group identified. Estimate 2 dozen active fighters. 1 commanding officer. Holding position. There was a pause, then a quiet reply. Do not engage the commander. Confirm his presence and wait. But she had no intention of rushing. She watched for another hour. Then something changed. The mercenaries weren't preparing for defense. They were loading gear. checking weapons. One by one, they lined up in formation, not like a unit ready to defend a base, but like a strike team preparing to move out. Elena's breath slowed. She knew what this meant. They were planning an assault. She pulled her scope slightly higher and scanned the ridge. There, tucked behind the trees, was a pack of armored vehicles. Light trucks. No heavy artillery. Just speed and surprise. They weren't waiting to be found. They were planning to hit first. She spoke again into the radio. Command confirm. Enemy preparing to mobilize. Possible offensive maneuver underway. Requesting immediate action. Command hesitated. We're not ready to advance. We can't pull the main force through until the pass is clear. Then came the worst sound of all, silence. She was alone. She turned her attention back to the ridge. The commander was on the move now, walking with his second-in-command toward the lead vehicle. Time was running out. She did the math in her head. Distance. Wind. Drop. No room for emotion. No room for doubt. Elena exhaled and shifted her sights. The shot would be risky. Long range. Through low cloud cover. But it was now or never. She squeezed the trigger. The sound echoed through the valley, like thunder rolling over stone. Through the scope, she saw the commander collapse. Chaos erupted. Shouting. Gunfire. The fighters scrambled for cover, firing wildly into the mist. Elena was already moving, sliding back from her position, changing angles, preparing for return fire. But none came close. She'd done more than take out a leader. She'd broken their momentum. They weren't attacking now. They were retreating. The rain came without warning, sharp, cold, and carried on the wind like needles. Captain Elena Morris didn't flinch. She welcomed it. Rain meant cover. Rain meant sound. And rain meant the enemy would be less confident with their ears and eyes dulled by weather. She shifted to her secondary position, an elevated outcropping with partial shelter under a jutting rock shelf. From here, she had a wider view of the lower ridge, where the enemy had begun to retreat. Or so it seemed. She pulled out her notebook again, flipping back to earlier pages. The layout of their compound, the number of fighters, the patrol routes. Something wasn't adding up. She'd taken out the commander. Confirmed kill. The unit should have crumbled. But their retreat had been too clean, too organized. These men were trained, more than she'd assumed. And, worse, they had a contingency plan. Down below, trucks had pulled out, but only half of them were loaded. The others remained parked, camouflaged under the trees. Fighters stayed behind. Not to regroup, but to bait. It was a trap. She almost smiled. They were expecting reinforcements to sweep in after the leader's death. They were waiting for an assault team to charge through the pass. Instead, they got her. She adjusted her scope again and focused on the nearest truck. A man crouched beside it, whispering into a field radio. His voice barely audible through the rain. She picked up a single word, coordinates. They weren't retreating from her position. They were relaying it. They had found her. Her breath slowed. She checked her surroundings. No movement yet. No eyes on her. But it wouldn't stay that way for long. She needed to disappear, and fast. Rolling to her left, she packed her gear with practiced efficiency. Every movement silent. Every strap secure. The rock she'd used for cover would now betray her location. If they were watching the hillside, they'd aim for the highest point. She moved downslope, crawling low through soaked grass and sharp stone. 10 meters. 20. 40. Then she stopped behind a fallen tree trunk, soaked through and half buried in mud. From here, she set up again. Different angle. Lower elevation. Limited visibility, but it was enough. Just in time. A sniper round tore through the space she'd just left, clean, fast, and precise. They had a shooter. Not just a lucky guess. She scanned the upper tree line across the ridge. Movement, barely visible, just a shimmer between branches. She narrowed her eyes and waited. The shooter would scan again. They always did. Seconds passed. Then, the glint of a scope. She fired. Her shot cracked through the rain and echoed into silence. She kept watching. No second shot followed. She waited longer. Still nothing. Target neutralized. But now the enemy knew exactly what they were dealing with. They wouldn't send scouts next. They'd send hunters. She pulled back again, this time toward a narrow ravine she'd mapped earlier. It ran parallel to the ridge, filled with rocks, moss, and just enough concealment for her to move unseen. It wasn't safe. Nothing was now. But it bought her time. Back at base, command was scrambling. "We lost drone coverage again," one voice reported. "We've had no visuals for hours." Her last transmission said the enemy was still active. "What's her status?" A long silence followed. Then, finally, her voice returned, calm and cold. "Sniper down. Position compromised. Relocating. Enemy is not retreating. They're hunting." The room froze. No one spoke. No one had to. Captain Elena Morris wasn't just surviving. She was in the middle of something far more dangerous than anyone had expected. Water dripped from the brim of her hood as Captain Elena Morris crouched in the narrow ravine. Her fingers were numb. Her boots soaked through. But she didn't notice the cold anymore. Her focus was locked on the sounds around her. Not the rain. Not the wind. But the small, sharp things, the snap of a twig under pressure, the shift of gravel under cautious feet, the kind of noise people made when they thought they were being quiet. They were closing in. She stayed low, sliding her hand across the wet stone as she moved deeper into the ravine. The walls on either side were steep and slick, but they offered cover. She knew this terrain better than they did now. Every inch she'd studied. Every rock she'd memorized. If they thought she'd panic, they were wrong. About 15 meters behind her, someone spoke. Not loudly, but just enough to carry through the wet air. "She's down there. Keep eyes sharp. Orders are to bring back her position, not her body." They weren't just trying to kill her. They wanted to track her. Make her lead them to something bigger. That told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't about the mountain pass anymore. This was deeper. Coordinated, funded, and very carefully planned. She needed proof. Elena pressed herself into the rock wall and watched as two silhouettes moved along the ridge above her. Not rushing, not scanning wildly. These weren't amateurs. They were methodical. One watched while the other moved. Professional. She waited until they passed, then doubled back along the ravine, making her way to a side path she'd marked earlier. It was tight, barely wide enough for a body with gear, but it led to a narrow overlook directly above the trail the enemy was using. She reached it and went prone, setting her rifle into the muddy ground. Through the scope, she saw both men again, now paused at a checkpoint with two more operatives. They spoke briefly, then pointed toward a signal flare in the distance. They weren't alone. She adjusted her scope slightly and focused on the pack one of them carried. A satellite transmitter. Short range, encrypted. Not standard issue. Who were these men? She could end them now, one by one. But she needed answers more than bodies. And she was outnumbered, outgunned, and possibly surrounded. She didn't shoot. Not yet. Instead, she pulled back again, this time toward an abandoned observation post she'd noticed earlier on her map. It was from an old training exercise, a structure half collapsed and forgotten. But it still had one thing she needed, an angle. 30 minutes later, she reached it. Half the roof was missing. The rest smelled of mold and rust. But the view was perfect. She could see the main road, the ridge, and the secondary path leading back to the enemy base. She set up fast, steadying her rifle across an old support beam. The rain had begun to ease. Visibility improved. That's when she saw it. A convoy. 3 black vehicles. Civilian make. No markings. But moving with confidence. And behind them, a figure stepped out. Taller. Confident. Not dressed for battle, dressed for command. This wasn't a mercenary. This was someone higher. Elena's breath slowed. She radioed command. New movement. Unknown vehicles. High-value individual on site. Possibly overseeing operation. Request intel match. Back at base, chaos followed. Copy. Stand by. But Elena wasn't standing by anymore. She had just uncovered the real reason behind the failed missions. The hidden base, the careful retreat. It wasn't a war. It was a cover-up. The rain stopped just before sunset, leaving the mountains quiet and slick with mist. The kind of silence that didn't feel natural. The kind that settled before something broke. Captain Elena Morris adjusted her position inside the collapsed outpost, her body still, her eyes locked through the scope. Down below, the convoy had parked beneath a thick canopy of trees. The tall man in civilian clothing remained outside, speaking to one of the mercenary officers. No weapons drawn. No urgency in his steps. He wasn't afraid. That told her everything. He knew no one was supposed to be watching. But someone was. She studied the man's posture, the way the guards kept their distance, the way no one dared interrupt him. He wasn't military. His jacket was too clean, his boots too polished. But the way others responded to him made it clear. He was in charge. Then came something unexpected. A drone. Not military. Not from her side. Smaller, quieter, and flying low. She followed it with her scope as it landed near the third vehicle. A man retrieved a small case from its belly, metallic, sealed, marked only with a red triangle. Elena's heart rate didn't spike, but her breath grew slower. She'd seen that symbol once before, years ago, during a joint intelligence briefing in a secure NATO facility. The triangle didn't belong to any one country. It belonged to a program, off the books, off the record. A program designed for covert operations with zero accountability. Now it was here, on her mountain. She whispered into her radio, her voice barely audible. Confirming black case. Marked triangle. Unknown content. Likely intelligence-grade cargo. Situation escalating. Back at base. The reply came after a long pause. Hold position. Do not engage. Surveillance satellite rerouting. ETA 90 minutes. 90 minutes. Too long. Elena shifted her scope back to the man in the jacket. He was on the move again, speaking with urgency now. Pointing toward the ridge. Toward the pass. Toward her. The enemy wasn't hunting her to eliminate a threat. They were trying to protect something. And she was getting too close. Suddenly, movement in the trees. Two fighters emerged near her left flank, rifles raised, scanning. Too close. She lowered her scope, steadied her breath, and reached for her sidearm. Not for shooting, for silence. The first man came within 10 meters, crouched low behind a stump. He didn't see her. Not yet. She waited. He took another step forward. She struck, fast and clean. One movement. No sound. The second man turned, but it was too late. Both were down. No shots fired. She dragged the bodies behind the outpost and returned to her rifle. The man in the jacket was boarding one of the vehicles. The black case went with him. The convoy began to roll. Elena keyed her radio. Target in motion. Convoy departing East Ridge. Recommend interception before case leave zone. Again, hesitation. Negative. No green light. Satellite imagery still down. Orders are to observe only. Observe? They wanted her to watch a high-level target escape with classified cargo and vanish into the hills? No. She had her own orders now. She marked the lead vehicle in her scope. Calculated distance. Wind. Elevation. Then a single shot. The windshield shattered. The driver slumped. The vehicle veered sharply and crashed against a tree. Panic erupted. Doors flew open. Shouts rang out. Elena stayed locked in. Second shot. Another fighter dropped. Third shot. One of the guards, near the case, fell backward. The man in the jacket dove, behind the truck, shouting into a phone. But it was too late. She'd exposed them. And now they would have to choose. Fight her. Or run. Smoke curled from the wrecked front vehicle, mixing with the fog as it rolled down the slope like a warning. The rest of the convoy halted, boxed in by the terrain and blind to where the shots had come from. Captain Elena Morris remained still, her breath even, her cheek pressed to the rifle. Her heartbeat was steady, but her mind moved fast. She didn't have the numbers, but she had the position, and right now that was all that mattered. Below, the man in the jacket was on the move again. He crawled to the second vehicle, dragging the black case behind him. 2 guards covered him, rifles raised, scanning the ridgeline with panicked eyes. They had no idea where she was. That gave her seconds, maybe less. She shifted slightly, adjusted for angle, and fired again. One of the guards dropped instantly. The second returned fire blindly, bullets slamming into trees and rocks, none even close. Elena didn't flinch. She fired again. Silence. Now only the man and the case remained. She watched as he reached the door of the second truck, threw it open, and shoved the case inside. But he didn't climb in. He stopped, turned, pulled something from his jacket. Binoculars. He scanned the hills, slowly, methodically. This wasn't panic anymore. This was calculation. He was smart. Too smart to be just a courier. Then something strange. He raised a radio to his mouth and said something, calm, clear, and without fear. Within seconds, a flare shot into the sky. Bright red. Not a distress signal. A call. A second later, the trees to the west exploded with movement. Dozens of fighters. Not 5. Not 10. Dozens. They'd been hiding, waiting for the signal. They were better armed, better organized, and they were coming fast. Elena pulled back from the scope. This wasn't just a transport mission. This was an extraction. And she just triggered their timeline. She moved quickly, gathering her gear, eyes scanning for her exit route. The observation post was no longer secure. She had maybe 2 minutes before they reached her position. She bolted downslope, careful with her steps. One misstep could give her away. Behind her, gunfire erupted, but not at her. They were firing into the trees, laying down cover, buying time for the man and the case to escape. She turned and saw the second truck reversing fast, kicking up mud and leaves as it spun toward a side road. Not a trail. A hidden path, masked from aerial view. They were prepared for this. Elena reached a narrow clearing with a view of the exit road. She dropped to one knee and aimed. 1 shot left in the magazine. She didn't hesitate. She aimed for the engine block, not the driver. She pulled the trigger. The shot hit clean. The truck stalled, smoke pouring from the hood. Screams followed. She reloaded. Movement ahead. Someone running with the case. She aimed again, fired. The man dropped. The case skidded across the dirt. Then the air shifted. A round tore past her ear, slamming into the tree behind her. Sniper. She rolled left, hitting the ground hard, mud soaking her sleeves. Another shot rang out. Missed. She crawled fast, getting behind cover. Her sidearm in hand now. She was alone, outnumbered, surrounded. But she wasn't running. Not now. Because the case was still there, 20 meters ahead, unguarded. And Captain Elena Morris had no intention of letting it disappear. Captain Elena Morris crawled through the mud, breath low, heart steady. The black case lay just ahead, half buried in leaves and soaked dirt, its metal surface still gleaming beneath the misty sky. Around her, gunfire echoed in bursts, sporadic, frantic. The enemy had numbers, but they didn't have eyes. Not on her. Not yet. She moved like smoke, keeping to the ground, every inch measured. A single wrong move and she'd be exposed. The sniper who'd fired on her earlier hadn't missed by much. He was skilled, patient, still watching. She stopped behind a thick tree trunk, checked the case's position again, and then glanced upward. The ridge line above, too quiet. That's where he'd be, waiting for a clear shot. She knew his pattern now. He fired only when he had a clean line. That gave her one option: bait him. She pulled a spent magazine from her vest and tossed it across the clearing. It landed with a thud. The sniper took the shot. Bark exploded from the log where the magazine landed. Too late. She'd already moved. 3 fast steps, low and quick, and she reached the case. Her fingers wrapped around the handle just as another shot ripped past her. Dirt exploded inches from her side. But she didn't stop. She dove behind a nearby boulder, dragging the case with her. Breathing hard, she flipped it over and inspected the locks. Not standard. Biometric. Coded. Secure. She keyed her radio. Command, I have the case. Lock type: dual biometric scan, government-grade encryption. High-level asset. Target confirmed as Intel courier. Command's reply came after a tense pause. Understood. Priority is extraction with case. Repeat, do not attempt to open. Air support is inbound. ETA 16 minutes. 16 minutes. A lifetime. Below her, enemy fighters regrouped, shouting commands, forming flanks. They were no longer in chaos. They knew where she was. And now, they were coming for her. She checked her ammo. 3 rounds left. 2 mags in reserve. 1 sidearm. No backup. But she had the high ground now. And the case. She climbed slightly higher, finding a new perch just behind a downed tree. From here, she could see movement below. 5 men. Advancing fast. 1 carried a radio. Another had a scoped rifle. She fired. The radio man dropped. The others scattered. 1 returned fire blindly. Another tried to flank left. She shifted her aim, second shot. The flanker fell, tumbling down the slope. Then a voice called out from the trees. Male. Confident. Too calm for a soldier under fire. Captain Morris, it said, we don't want you. Just the case. Leave it, and we'll let you walk out. She didn't answer. He tried again. You don't know what you're holding. That's above your pay grade. She slowly raised her rifle and aimed toward the sound. I know enough, she said aloud. Silence. Then a flash. He fired first, but not at her. Smoke burst upward, a signal flare. More backup? No. A distraction. Below, another group broke cover, sprinting toward the case. Too late. She fired once more, clean, center mass. The runner dropped. A shadow moved behind her. She turned fast, sidearm raised. One of the mercenaries had flanked wide, almost silently. He froze when he saw her expression. A single shot echoed. Then, nothing. The valley went quiet. In the distance, the hum of rotors began to rise. Extraction had arrived. Captain Elena Morris stepped into the clearing, mud-streaked, bleeding, but standing. She looked down at the case, then at the wreckage of the convoy, the scattered enemy, and the silence they'd left behind. Whatever was in that box, whatever truth it held, it would now see daylight. Because this time, they hadn't just failed to stop her. They'd exposed everything trying to hide from her scope.